Welcome to the Scholar Chronicles. This is Dr. Loh KS, a historian. In this podcast, I ask fellow scholars to share their personal stories from the field. These stories are often not discussed in public, but they are interesting because they shed light on the research we do, the challenges we face, and the relationship between scholarship and society. So, hope for this podcast is to help scholars do their research a little bit better by reflecting on these stories. We have two guests today, both returning guests. Francis Loh is back with us. In the previous episode, Francis talked about going to Cornell University and its famed Southeast Asian Studies program. And the other guest from a previous episode with Jack Humphrey, which is on the New Villages, Teng Phee, who did his PhD on the New Villages together with me when we were both at Murdoch. So we have been concerned and almost obsessed with New Villages for a while. And today we are going to talk about how a political scientist and a social historian looked into New Villages in their own ways and the similarities and differences as well. Welcome, Francis and Teng Phee.
Hello.
Hi.
So for the listener who is new to this podcast, maybe you can go back to the previous podcast with Francis, where he talked about the circumstances that prompted him to do his PhD on the New Villages in Malaysia. So this was in 1977. Is that right, Francis?
That's right, 1977.
Could you talk about your aims again, right? The purpose of your PhD dissertation.
Okay, it was the times more than anything else. And it was a time when Malaysia had just launched its new economic policy, and it had proposed that we will now have a special program to uplift, all people regardless of their race, anybody who's poor, but also to restructure the occupational system so that race will not be identified with occupation. And I was a bit concerned that actually originally the government did not identify poor Malays, poor Chinese and poor Indians. So I wanted to show, in my thesis that there were truly very poor Chinese. And of course, you start off from that regard in the New Villages. One could also have gone to the slum areas in the urban areas for that purpose, but I did this instead in the rural areas. So that was one. The other aspect, I don't know if I mentioned this already, is that in the world of social in history, suddenly people are very interested in social history. And I still remember at that time I was very excited about, I came across this group called the History Workshop people. They were in Sussex University, and Professor Asa Briggs, who was leading this, and they were writing very exciting stuff, whereas before that we will focus on the big elites, how they make policy, and we assume that everything would then just flow from that onwards. So I wanted to do something from the bottom up as well, not just focusing on poor Chinese, but bottom up. And I think the other aspect was that actually during this period of time I was attracted to the fact that there was a group of in Chinese politics, the old Chinese political parties were going through reform, and the MCA had a reform movement, and very new young, leaders came to the fore, and some of them, will play a very important role in my thesis. So this will include people like Dr. Lim Keng Yek, who later on becomes joins MCA, but actually gets kicked out of MCA, and then he joins the Gerakan Party and ultimately emerges as the minister in charge of New Villages. So there was this group of people from within the old elite who suddenly realized that it was necessary for them to xiaxiang, to go down, to go and have dirty their hands, look around, that. And this was what they were doing, and I thought that was so interesting. So I wanted to engage with them as well. So for these three different reasons, I began to focus on new villages.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
kind of
sorry.
yeah,
There's a fourth reason. Fourth
right.
reason was uh, because this period also coincided with a period of what we in Malaysia we now call the new emergency or the second emergency.
Mm.
You know, okay.
Yeah, because your study actually began in the 1880s, right? Uh,
Yes.
all right, Francis. Yeah,
Like,
which is kind of interesting, right, for a political scientist to start historically. And Teng Phee, did you start historically as well? The origins of the squatter problem, or did you go, straight into the new villages?
Yeah, mainly go straight to the yeah.
So you see, Francis is more of a historian here. You mentioned poverty, you mentioned occupation. Was the concept of class very important to you?
oh yeah, very much important. Yeah. So most certainly, I mean the whole um, exercise in academia in the Malaysian context was everybody was just so fast, so concerned, so imbued with the notion of race, race, and it led to the racial conflict of 1969 and so forth. I was actually schooled in this ferment that was taking place in America, in the West generally, when there was a lot of revisits to the old left literature. So Marxism had a new lease of life. So I would have, for the purpose of my study and all that, I would have read people like Althusser and Poulanzas and, these left um, new Marxists, so to speak. And this was very kosher. And in my classes on politics, we would talk about the new democracy in the world. And, we are so imbued with this idea about what is democracy. In those days, they were really debating and discussing it. And I remember everybody had to read this book by Barrington Moore, Social Origins of Dictatorship and Democracy. And they had, examples from different case studies, Japan, China, India, Russia, England, America. And this was the classic, and it's such a very nice collection of different cases. And this professor, very, very established professor, he taught at Harvard. And people learn this if you're doing a first primer course on history of Asia. Oh, you would then turn to this book. You did something on Western, Europe. Oh, you use this. So it was that. So and in this, what's so interesting is that the case in this argument by Barrington Moore, he asserts that actually all changes throughout history have been accompanied by violence, including the rise of democracy, including the rise of dictatorship. So, violence does not accompany simply the rise of dictatorship, but it accompanies the rise of, English democracy, American Civil War, before they actually had extension of the right to vote and all that to everybody else. So this was the argument. And I remember, apart from this, there was this very important book by somebody called C.B. Macpherson, professor of philosophy in Toronto, which we also had to read. And this book was talking about, I think it was called The Real Will of Democracy. And he talks about liberal democracy a la, England, the Western Europe, America, and all that. And then he talks about it actually a people's democracy, as in the case of the Soviet Union and some of the Eastern European countries. So they actually took that kind of economic democracy very, very seriously. And what was so interesting for me also was that they considered that actually there was uh, third world democracy, which was also in the offing. Insofar as actually you didn't emphasize liberalism, you didn't emphasize economic distribution, but you emphasized a brotherhood, a sisterhood of everybody, which had emerged from the nationalist struggle. So if you go back to the French Revolution, liberté, égalité, fraternity, this was it. These were the origins, the different virtues associated with democracy. So my point actually is that the world of academia was in ferment in America when I was there. And so we spread it very, very widely. Subsequently, it begins to close down. Begins to close down. You know.
Yeah,
So
that's interesting because both Teng Phee and I, we are social historians. We are practicing social history like 30 years after you did, and after those what was called new social history at the time, right? And it seemed to us, right, if we look back at that social history, it was originally a lot more political than what it is now. Right now, it is more like people's lives. Where in the past, it was more concerned with movements and the people's movements against, like you said, dictatorship and things like that. Like Howard Zinn, for example, and the British social
yeah,
historians, they were all Marxists. Right now, it seems a bit more tame in a way, less
yeah.
politically oriented, right? Is that Teng Phee? Is that your thinking as well, right? When you did the social history of the new villages, how much was politics in your study?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. Yeah, we all need to reflect on that. Yeah, right from the beginning, I didn't actually want to look at the politics, itself. Yeah, as compared to I think Francis' work, it provides a more like a macro political economic studies, meaning we look at the global economic and particularly how actually the Kinta Valley tin mining industry, yeah, when it demise, how it actually has impact on the local people. Yeah. So in my case, I think I would more focus on their everyday life. Yeah. Even though part of it, we need to look at the political aspect as well. Meaning during the emergency, how the British authority actually institutionalized in this unique space. Yeah. So I'm more concerned about their memories, about their voices. That's why I would say it would heavily rely on oral history, yeah, approach, yeah, and of course cross-referencing with the archival material at the time.
Yeah, let me just bring in Francis here, right? Francis, of course, the listener might not know, examined Teng Phee's dissertation. I don't know if you remember it very well. What do you think of Teng Phee's, interpretation of social history?
Um, Not so much. What do I think about his attitude towards social history? But I think it was a top class thesis.
Hmm.
And it was like he said. He used a lot of oral history. He interviewed people who were 70, 80 years old. If you listen to his podcast, he says that was one of the first things he did. He went to a coffee shop, he looked for old people, talked to them, tried to get them excited about telling him their stories. So when I was there 30 years earlier, nobody wanted to talk to me. Don't forget, this was the period of the second emergency. So you cannot, this is very touchy, very sensitive topic still, and dangerous, if not painful. So whereas Teng Phee comes at a time when, when you hit, I'm now 70 years old, when you hit this age, you really want to talk to people about your life, what you did and all that, you think you're very great, you've made some contribution. And I think he caught them at this very special moment when they wanted to share with people about their lives. How difficult it was, how they survived, how they compromised, and they did so well in the end. So that was, I thought, brilliant. And to do this kind of history, you must actually be familiar with the different Chinese dialects. And somebody like Teng Phee is not just, Chinese ad. He knows how to read the literature. He actually is, he kept captures all the nuances of different people who are speaking Cantonese, Mandarin, or Kejia, Hakka, or Teochew, and so on and so forth. So that's, I think, not so straightforward. Not everybody can do this well.
Mm.
But I think also he was lucky because most of the documents were now open. Although he said about 5%, 5%, you couldn't get access to. My goodness, my time, 60, 70% you couldn't have access to. Because there was a 25-year ruling, and some documents were actually extended to 50 years. So, so Anthony Short had said, had got the okay for somebody like Jack Humphrey to have access to these documents. Teng Phee couldn't get access to all, but in my time, which is 30 years earlier, by accident, I actually got to see some very secret documents. And after 2-3 days, they realized they had made a mistake by making it available to me. And so and at that point in time, you didn't have a handphone, to go and snap everything, and then you have everything, like a fax, facsimile. No, at that time you had to handwrite everything. And each page to photocopy, would cost you about 120 or something, one page, 120 ringgit, which is a lot of money for one single page. Yeah. So anyway, come back to him. And I thought that one of the interesting thing about Teng Phee's thesis was that he actually introduces us to Foucault, and it's current during your time, when you're studying the social science, history, and all that. We didn't. We studied the structuralists, and so I thought that Foucault actually opened the gates a little bit, and also you are also following after the experience of somebody like James Scott, who's talking about weapons of the weak. He goes down. Then he is not looking for where's the class struggle. No, it doesn't take it that doesn't appear in that form. It appears in the form of, like something more, polished. So it's a protest takes a different, like sometimes cultural form rather than picking up a gun or a sparrow, bow and arrow and fighting it out like that. No, it does not necessarily take that form all the time. Yeah. So I think Teng Phee, because of his linguistic skills, because of the coincidence of access to documents, plus actually he had studied all these new ways of looking at society, social change, conflict, and he applied this all very well and put together a very good thesis. And I've read most of the things, most of the serious studies on new villages. And to my mind, this is the finest of this generation, Yeah. So, Teng Phee, you owe me a dinner.
There's a testimonial
Thanks.
over there, a verbal testimonial.
Yeah.
Teng Phee, the dissertation won the second prize, right? In the, what was that? The Australian,
Yes.
what was that? Australian Asian Studies or History dissertation?
Yeah, Asian Studies.
Asian Studies, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a fantastic thesis. But I mean, the way that you actually put it, Francis, is that you kind of understand that it took a very different definition of politics from your kind of politics, right? And because Foucault was about governmentality, a different kind of politics, and James Scott is about resistance. So in a way, if one wanted to be argumentative, the idea of politics in Teng Phee is very different from your kind of politics. But yet, you are quite open to the idea of politics in that sense.
In a sense, it also depends on what do we understand by politics. And my generation, we played with a more open-ended notion of politics. And somebody like Ben Anderson, whom I was studying about, said politics didn't just emerge with the introduction of elections and political parties and all that. Politics was there in the soul of people, when they were involved in religion, and religious worship and religious fights with one another, conversions from one religion to another. Politics is all that. So this is my understanding of politics as well, and um, I have written about this idea, this distinction between what I call big P formal politics, power politics. It's to do with elections, political parties, the judiciary and balance checks and balances, the constitution. But, I dabble in the world of NGO, small p, people oriented, perhaps you could say cultural politics. And that's a different idea of politics. We're not interested in the elections per se. We are very interested in actually changing the minds of people in our community so that we actually collaborate more, we work together. So that for me is also politics. So it's no, politics is not simply about big P formal politics. It shouldn't be. It cannot be. And if it's that just that, then you miss a lot about power play. Power play is not just limited to that area. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I want to talk to both of you about the issues that you have trying to speak to the people. So, Francis, you said when you went there, they were not willing to talk to you. What did you do?
Let me just clarify. Like I said, I'm doing a political science thesis. Okay,
Right.
I'm doing a political science thesis, but under the Ben Anderson, who himself is a very culturalist. You
Mm,
know, and so these people, I went there and I didn't need to go and stay in the village.
mm,
I didn't need to. If I did things in the old-fashioned political science way, I should just be interviewing people, playing with government documents, studying the constitution more and all that. No, I went down, and when I went down, I old-fashioned political anthropology lah. So I observed from close distance, from close range, but I also got involved in the everyday life of the villagers. So I would get up in the morning and I would follow the man whom I stayed with, followed him to his fields, and then we would go and um, pluck tapioca leaves to feed the fish in the ponds, and then we would do a little bit of if they are going to. You see, I mean, it depends, because we planted tapioca, we planted chilies, we planted, you know, um, um, green vegetables as well, you see. So some of these, depending on what is the plant that you have to tend to for that period of time, then you might have a lot more work or less work, you know. So this was how we would do that. And then you do this all in the morning because when the afternoon sun comes out, it's impossible to work in the fields anymore because it's open field, hot as can be. So I didn't realize, that actually the sun plays such an important role. Everybody takes a siesta not because they're lazy people, but because it doesn't make sense, to go and do all this nonsense in the hot sun. So, and then after that, by about 3, 4 o'clock, they get active again. They go down to their fields again and do all kinds of things. Then they come back late, and in between they might be doing some other things, you know. Or they might, if they have motorbikes, they'll just go away, go back and do something else, fetch children to school, these kinds of things. So this was what I followed their routine, followed their routine. So that was my daily uh, activity. But I followed also what was happening in the village committee. So I followed their meetings. There was a cemetery committee which was bringing the 4 villages together. They shared a cemetery, so I attend that as well. And then from time to time, they will have the, you know, 千人 but 1,000 people dinner, because of their celebrating the anniversary of some school or some cemetery association activity. So you get involved in these kinds of things, lah. And so I would follow this, and by not planning, but by coincidence, I was there when the 1978 general election was being called. So I had this opportunity to see how electioneering was conducted while I was in the New Villages. And they have a MCA branch. They have one whole building to themselves. The whole year it was closed. Nothing, no, it was never open. But during this season, hey, suddenly it gets opened, and some kind of activities take place. Like, mainly visitors will come, give a talk. And I worked actually, I stayed in one village, but I worked around 4 different villages, and this was in the Kinta, northern Kinta area. And across from northern Kinta was Sungai Siput. So I also, followed what was going on in those other places, because activities sometimes, not here, but actually will be conducted there, but involving people from your own village. They don't follow the district boundaries that, so you miss out a lot if you just strictly say, oh, I'm going to follow, I'm just going to conduct my study within the confines of this area. Actually, in the minds of people, they are very charming with the people on the other side as well. So they, I follow them accordingly. So the next door was actually quite interesting because Sami Velu, the minister, and the MIC leader, was contesting the elections. And he was actually a new man. That time he was a new politician, but quite an effective communicator. I could see what was happening. His relationship with Indians, and plus in other places it was Chinese. So this was what I did. I mean, for a total of about almost 8 months. And I went to the school. The PTA would have meetings. I would also attend the meetings. And when I was there, they what do you call it? They brought street lights, electricity, and they erected street lights for the first time in the history of the village. So it was such a big thing because now the whole, town, the whole village was lit up at night, and big topic of discussion for weeks on ends. And I also walked around when it came with the neighborhood watch committee, the Rukun Tetangga. So, you're supposed to go and walk around because I remember I told you this, the second emergency in this area. So there was this Rukun Tetangga neighborhood watch, patrols. So every family had to send a man to kind of participate in this. So I represented my building. So I just followed them. And then we walk seriously for about 2 hours. Then everybody adjourned to the Kedai Kopi, where we just begin to have coffee, and instead of just walking endlessly around the village, And some people then just go to the some big house, not a what do you call it, a warehouse, where they store a lot of like tapioca and all that. And then they'll just go and take a rest. And then about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, everybody will get up and say, we'll do one more round around the village. So that was our duty because you're on duty for 8 hours to 10 hours, so, but you don't, you're a bloody fool if you're going to walk endlessly around and around the village for all that period of time. So you take time out as well. So, you listen, you follow their ways, and then you learn, catch a lot of folk wisdom, uh, and these kinds of things you don't capture if you're not on the ground.
Teng Phee, you want to say something?
Just want to ask Francis, how did you choose your case study? I remember you mentioned one new village, right? You changed its name, Wu Nai. So you would
Yeah,
like to briefly touch on that?
yeah.
you
Actually,
mean
these
give the
are
real name, is it? Can you reveal the real name now?
yeah. No, I mean there are 4 new villages around Timor.
Mm.
There is Tanah Hitam, which is where I went. Uh, Kantan Baru, which is just north of this, and then the Kuala Kuang and Cakak Giting. So this is 4 small villages around Timor. And the reason why I went to this area was, um, I should have started talking about this. I went into this village through under the auspices of Dr. Lim Keng Yek. Before when I started getting interested in this topic, I knew that it's a very sensitive topic, especially at the time of the new emergency. And so I made sure that I would be protected. So I actually went to see this man who was um, the first minister of new villages. And so he was very interested in me because I was interested in new villages. And because nobody, these scholars and all that, nobody cares about these new villages. So he was very excited as well. And he turned out he ran a clinic in Ipoh, but he also had a clinic which he came to in the afternoons in Timor, in the town of Timor itself. And then, in between, after he's finished, he will start going around, into all these other places, sort of like um, conducting his political work. And unfortunately, this constituency was promised to the MCA already. So he couldn't get to contest in this area. He had to go to Jalong, which is on the, in Sungai Siput, to contest that. So that's why I told you that, this man, he actually cultivates, his followers, in a place like Sungai in like the Timor area. And then actually he contests next door. So he brings all his followers to go and help him in his campaign and all that. So I said, that's why I'm saying that you cannot just follow these boundaries, artificial boundaries too strictly, because then you cut yourself off from the flow, the ebb and flow of the real politics that's taking place. So anyway, so this is how I got into these areas. I got under his auspices. I also the other man whom I got advice and protection from was Tan Sri Tan Chi Kun. Tan Chi Kun was actually the Mr. Opposition, and he was in Jinjang. And he's the one who actually, started off when I first came back. I wanted to go and talk to somebody. But in my time, you know, you shy away from this topic because it's very sensitive. But when you get involved, a lot of people who are involved in, they are very excited that you are showing interest in this topic, and they go out of their way to help you. And the third man who actually helped me was another elected member of parliament, but at that time he was actually an Adun, state assemblyman, uh, P. Patu from the DAP, and he was in south of if he was the Adun or the state assemblyman for the constituency of Kopeng. So I made sure I covered my bases. I had a minister, I had an opposition member, and I had, somebody who was Mr. Opposition in Parliament. So, to make sure that I also get, like good accounts from all sides, you know. So I covered my bases properly. And they were very kind people, very happy that a young man was interested in this topic and shared freely. I would just sometimes hang out in the clinic of Lim Keng Yek, and then I would just sit down there as though I was a, hospital assistant or something like that, interview his patients, get to know them. He said, 罗高啊，你可以跟着他去他的I can follow them to their village, you know. So it's this kind of thing, and I would hang around Patu's, constituency. He runs his office every day. His constituents would come to ask for advice about this, how to do this, that, this problem. Can he see to it? So I just observed what the politicians were doing on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Now, Francis, you've done the research already, and it's been exceptional research. But at the time, being your first real field work, right? How prepared were you? Was there a manual for field work? And did the manual tell you what you should do if you had a setback? I mean, the manual obviously didn't tell you about new villages, right?
Yeah.
So, what were the reservations and the fears that you had stepping into the field at the time?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, I think you just felt your way along,
Mm.
and made mistakes, sometimes. And then initially that you ask sensitive questions, of course, people are not going to answer you. Like for instance, I conducted a survey of the village, um, household size. It is okay. How do you assess people's wealth and income? I mean, you cannot just say, what's your salary? You know, how much do you earn from selling this or doing that? You cannot do that. And so you have to be sensitive. And so I made mistakes along the way.
Mhm.
And I also asked them this question about how much land are you farming? How much land are you farming? And they're very sensitive because they're doing all this illegally. They're doing this on TOL, temporary occupation license. They might apply TOL for a small, 2, half acres, 800, small piece lah. But actually they are farming on a larger piece of land. So it's and it's so interesting that even though everybody is doing this illegally, they have an understanding among themselves that this is my boundary, don't come and kacau my area. And so there was this kind of a understanding among themselves lah. So I mean, there was no manual for sure. I mean, so I just did this along the way, and um, was there? I told you I depended on these 3 politicians lah. So I would just say, how do I do this? How can I get this kind of information? Say, well, you should just follow that. Do this, do that. So I did. I had a motorbike, which allowed me to do this. And I was very seriously living in the village the entire time. And every week, I would then jump on my motorbike and then just ride it to Ipoh, and I'll just go into the cinema. I didn't care what movie was showing, but it was just to let go a bit, get away from it all, and I'll treat myself to a nice makan and all that, go and visit some people whom I know who live in the city, some distant relatives, who are wondering, what the hell am I doing here? Why am I coming to visit them? We're not particularly close, but it was to get away. And then you go back refreshed a bit. You go back refreshed a bit, and you'll be surprised how much activities there are in the village, because everything then becomes important to observe and to document. I have, a few volumes of my diaries from the field. So I just, like the anthropologist is taught, you just document everything, and, it might look, you do something which you don't think is relevant, very important, but, you look back and say, hey, yeah, this one is related to that other thing. So you begin to, sort of connect the dots later on. So, and this I learned from a lot of anthropologists at Cornell. There were all these people. You see, I was registered as a government or political science student, but actually I was encouraged when I decided this was the topic I wanted to do. I was encouraged that you just can't run away from going down into the field and staying there. And so I braced myself for this, prepared, and talked to a lot of fellow people who were preparing themselves to go into the field, who were anthropologists, to do this. I mentioned to you the last time that I had a friend called Tan Chi Beng. Tan Chi Beng he was an anthropologist, and he's somebody you might want to interview later on. Because Chi Beng, he goes to live in one of the few rural Baba communities.
Oh.
Yeah, and this is outside of Malacca, Bukit Rambai. So this is we are only very familiar with the Peranakans in the urban areas, but this was actually a poor rural Peranakan community, and Chibeng went to stay with them. So he was somebody who I got little tips from, and he preceded me. He preceded me by a year or maybe half a year, and I had a professor. Um, Jim Siegel, professor of anthropology, who visited me when I was out here. And he visited me, and you know, because he was an external examiner for the University of Malaya. So he had, by chance, the opportunity to be here. So he just checked on me and said, "Hey, have you tried to do that?" Like there was a lot of gambling that was taking place in the community. And they'll go not only gamble among themselves, play mahjong and everything, but go outside to gamble and go to the race course and all that. So I didn't understand, this meaning of why is there so much gambling going on? They are so poor. Why they get good? So and then he told me actually it's this chance to break through, make a fortune and all that. But also the richer of them, he said, are very keen to share. And so they purposely they lose sometimes, and they quite do so happily, because it's sort of like, so I began to observe, is something true or not. So it's little tips like this which help me to better understand my times when I was there. Yeah.
Okay, great. Let me give Teng Phee some time to talk. So we shared the office at Murdoch, right? And then at some point you disappeared for quite a while from the office. So I never really knew what kind of field work you were doing. Could you tell us, like you asked Francis yourself, right? Like, how did you plan your itinerary? How did you select your case studies? And did you actually stay in the new villages as well, and try to live there and follow people's way of life?
I spent about 1 year. So once I think get my approval, okay, to go to the field. Yeah, so it's about 12 months of my field work. So basically, I came back to Malaysia, and then before that, I have to apply the Prime Minister office, the research unit, yeah, to get the permission, yeah. And okay, as I mentioned, I spent about 3 months at the Arki Nenggara National Archive, yeah, to have an overlook of what are some of the raw material there. And as compared to Francis, I'm more lucky. I got a car. So he has his own motorbike. So with the car, actually, I can travel quite extensively across the Malay Peninsula. Yeah. So with that, I think I spent about 2 to 3 months to travel, yeah, to visit 150 new village. Yeah. So with the archival material and the field work, yeah, and then I come up with a few case studies. Yeah. So to me,
Can I just quickly ask? Francis had recommendations. Did you need to rely on recommendations?
no, in my case, I just went to a coffee house, yeah, and then mingle for a while, yeah. So and ask who they will recommend me to approach to. So normally they will refer me to the former village head and the current one. Yeah, 村长, yeah. So if you want to stay at any of the village, yeah, you need to get the permission. Yeah, in local, we say you have to buy mato, right? Yeah, you have to get the approval, yeah, on green light from the 村长. So normally the new village will arrange one single room for you. Yeah. So I remember when I rode to my car to my first one of the case studies, right? Yeah, in the state of Pahang. Yeah, and of course with the car plate number. Yeah, I was told a few weeks later. Yeah, they were quite surprised. There's a stranger came to their village. Yeah, so with the car plate number, yeah, a few new villagers they actually purchased 4D and they got the strike. Yeah. So
Right, yeah. Wow.
yes, yeah. So that means yeah, maybe bring some luck. So they're more friendly to me. Yeah. So that's one story. Yeah. So with the Kopi house, right? Yeah, it's more like a public space. So you were easier. Normally, it would be elderly, male, men mostly. Yeah, sitting there drinking coffee and then chit chat. Yeah, we always tease lah, like 吃大炮. Yeah, so they will share a lot of their everyday life. Yeah, and of course we are quite aware of gender, plays a role. So if you want to interview women, then you have to visit their house. Yeah, so you will go to a more like private space, for you to interview elderly ladies, yeah, who are more than 70 years or 80 years old. So with that, I need local, actually, new village head or his wife to help me to recommend and tag along with me, yeah. So with we need to build the rapport, meaning the trust, yeah. And of course, with the snowball theory, once you kick it off, yeah, they will recommend to their friends as well. Yeah. So it's interesting, of course, the narrative between a male and female are slightly quite different. And in particularly the female, they were more concerned about their children, how to survive and how to get more food for their family. Whereas men, they will talk more about grand narrative, about government policies and then communists, yeah, things like that. Yeah, so there's slightly different way of looking at their everyday life.
And I
We
just intervene. You
yeah, go
see,
ahead.
like the big difference between this time and my time. We were not very gender sensitive, you know, for 50 years ago, and I wasn't particularly thinking about, oh, I must get the other side of the story, from the women. We just assumed the story would be told by all the men, and that's enough. So now that's definitely a shortcoming. People of my generation who did that fieldwork. Some people who did this and they brought their wives along, then the wives would go and conduct this kind of research. There's this professor, Kurt Endicott, who's teaches at Dartmouth College where I went. And I visited him not so long ago, and his wife came along for fieldwork. And so at the end of the day, he had a very good story to tell because he covered both bases. But he himself didn't even think about talking about the women's role. But his wife covered it up, and together, when you look at their work, wow, it's so complementary. Yeah,
Uh,
but
yeah,
mine is not like.
Teng Phee, Yuan Min, what was her role?
Oh yeah, you mean it's my wife, right? Yeah.
You always forget,
Yeah, she did her master also research on New Village. Yeah. So one of the actually mentioned by Francis just now, yeah, Tanah Hitam. Yeah, quite interesting case studies. Yeah. And when we traveled, yeah, she actually came along with me. Yeah. So for the 2 or 3 months, actually we traveled together. Yeah. I would say like what Francis mentioned, it's always good that like a couple, they were. I'm not sure whether yeah, they when you go to a house, yeah, to do interview, yeah. So normally the male, not the gentleman will talk to you, yeah. Whereas the wife, they were just sitting at the side, yeah. So sometimes women can also chit chat with them, yeah, to learn a little bit more about the other side, from females' perspective. Yeah, I think that also helped. Yeah, you can win the trust from locals. Yeah, more easily, I would say. Yeah.
So when you stayed at the new village Teng Phee, it was did you engage in the kind of observation participation that Francis was doing, or was it just to stay overnight and then continue the interviews the next day?
Yeah. In each of my case study, I stay about 1 month. Yeah. So meaning, I need to rent a space there. Yeah. And with the introduction, by new village head, yeah, sometimes he will also assign another lady, because I have requested, to have a few female interview. Yeah. And yeah, normally they will arrange the date for me. Yeah. And I did not have the luxury, the way I escape is I will just go back to archive the Naki Nenggara, yeah, for maybe another round of archivist research. Yeah. So for the 3 months staying at the Aki Nenggara, yeah, the only thing I remember is there's only one canteen there. Yeah, so you have to eat curry, for almost 3 months. Yeah, so you have no other option for your meal there.
Francis talked about sensitive questions and making some mistakes in the questions that you asked. Was that also something you experienced?
Mm, my questionnaire would be like more open-ended. Yeah, so meaning we will start with their life and what year did he or she born, and then whether an opportunity they are going for their education and then their occupation. So it's more like a life journey they share. Yeah. And the other part, of course, when we touch on the resettlement experience, then we will have a few more concrete questions, whether they receive a notice in advance and compensation as promised by the government, and then the resettlement process, and also post resettlement at the new village. Yeah. So for that part, I think I'm quite lucky, like what Francis mentioned. In the year 2000s, yeah, people are more willing to share. Yeah, unless in a few cases, if they have some concern, yeah, they may just answer in a certain way lah. I can't remember this part of history and all. They will say it has been so long, nothing more to share.
Were people willing to talk about whether they had supported the MCP?
Yes, some of them, yeah. And also, in my case, I also try to look for some so-called ex-communists who returned from Southern Thailand after 1989, when they signed a peace agreement with the governments. Yeah. So that's another part of Yuming's research, in terms of ex-communists, guerrilla fighters, in particular female. Yeah. So in some of the interview, I will tag along, yeah, and we will touch on how did they perceive the new village, yeah, the resettlement process. So mostly, like last interview, the concentration camp, the Jizhonging, the concept. Yeah, I would say the communist side they will share the concept of concentration camp. When we look at the new village.